Welcome to Fractured Chaos.
The hardest truth I've learned is this: there are worse things than being lied to. It's looking into someone's eyes, someone whose breath you've memorized in sleep, and realizing they weren't lying at all. They just never thought you deserved the truth. My name is Sabrina, and this is how I learned to hear my own voice again. It started with steam rising from my coffee cup, obscuring my reflection in the window of Mockingbird Cafe. Rain pelted the glass like tiny fists demanding entry. November in Seattle feels like living inside someone else's sigh. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. 4 words that would unravel everything. You're not crazy. Trust yourself. I stared at those words until they blurred. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. The cafe sounds faded. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the indie playlist nobody really listened to. All of it receded until there was only the hollow drum of my heart against my ribs. I knew who she was without asking. Emily, the name Declan would mutter in his sleep sometimes. The name I'd seen flash across his screen before he'd quickly flip the phone over. "Just a colleague," he'd said, with that smile that never quite reached his eyes. I took another sip of my latte, but it had grown cold, bitter, like the realization that had been forming in my chest for months. I'd sensed it in the way Declan's touch had grown performative, how his eyes would drift past me when I spoke, as if searching for something more interesting on the horizon of our apartment, how he'd grown meticulous about his passwords, how he showered the moment he got home, but I'd convinced myself I was projecting. That the ghosts of past betrayals were making me see phantoms where there were only shadows. "You're not crazy." 4 words that validated every intuition I'd buried, every doubt I'd swallowed with morning coffee and goodnight kisses. I paid my bill and left the cafe, walking 12 blocks in the rain without opening my umbrella. I needed to feel something real on my skin. Our apartment was warm when I returned, the scent of garlic and rosemary hanging in the air. Declan was cooking, his love language. He looked up when I entered, water dripping from my hair, my coat. "Jesus, Sabrina, you're soaked." His concern seemed genuine. That was the cruelest part of it all, how easily tenderness and deception could occupy the same body. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. His hand stilled over the cutting board. Something shifted in his posture. Almost imperceptible, but I'd spent 3 years learning the topography of his body. I knew when the tectonic plates beneath his skin were shifting. "Can it wait until after dinner? The risotto's almost—" "Are you sleeping with Emily?" The knife clattered against the board. He didn't flinch, didn't reach to pick it up. Just stood there perfectly still, as if movement might shatter whatever careful story he'd been constructing. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were clear, relieved almost. "Yes." 1 syllable, 3 letters, a universe of betrayal. I waited for more, for denial, for excuses, for the familiar choreography of caught lovers. But he just stood there, watching me with something like curiosity. "How long?" My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. 4 months. 4 months. 16 weeks of kisses that meant nothing. Of "I love yous" that were counterfeit. Of building a future with someone who was already dismantling it behind my back. I expected anger to surge through me, hot and cleansing. But all I felt was a profound emptiness, as if something essential had been scooped out of me while I wasn't looking. Why? It wasn't even the question I meant to ask. I wanted to know how he could look into my eyes every morning and choose again and again to betray me. Declan wiped his hands on a dish towel slowly, methodically. Then he turned off the stove. Because being with you is like standing in front of a mirror that never lies, he said quietly. And I can't bear what I see in it. We sat at our dining table, the one we'd found at that antique market in Portland, the one I'd lovingly restored while he held the sandpaper. Now it felt like a prop in someone else's life. You make me feel seen, he continued, his voice hollow. Every time you look at me with that certainty in your eyes, like you believe I'm worthy of your love, and I know I'm not. So you cheated because I love you too well? The absurdity of it made me want to laugh, but the sound that escaped me was closer to a sob. I cheated because with Emily I don't have to be better than I am. She expects nothing, demands nothing. When I'm with her, I can be exactly the disappointment I know myself to be. His words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of confusion through me. This wasn't the script. Where was the denial, the blame shifting, the promises to change? With you, he continued, I feel like I'm constantly failing. You believe in me so completely, Sabrina. You see potential in me that I can't access. Do you know what that's like? To be loved for someone you're afraid you'll never become? So instead of trying, you decided to prove me wrong? My voice cracked. To become exactly the person I refused to believe you were? He looked down at his hands, artist's hands, I'd always thought, capable of creating beautiful things. Now I wondered what else they'd been creating behind my back. It wasn't about Emily, he said softly. It was never about her. It was about escaping from your expectations, from the weight of your belief in me. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. The crash was satisfying. The first honest sound in our apartment for months. Don't you dare make this about me, I said, my voice vibrating with an anger that was finally, blessedly arriving. Don't twist your cowardice into some tragic narrative about how my love was too much for you to bear. He didn't move to right the fallen chair, didn't try to touch me, just sat there, shoulders hunched, as if bracing for a blow he'd been expecting his entire life. Your expectations felt like a sentence, he whispered. Every time you told me I was kind or brilliant or worthy, it felt like you were talking to someone else, someone better, someone I could never be. And then, with devastating gentleness, he looked up at me and asked, "Can you still love me now that you know the truth?" As if the truth was a gift he was offering, as if his confession was an act of generosity rather than necessity. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I walked to our bedroom and began pulling open drawers. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found it. His old laptop, the one he claimed had died months ago. The one he'd insisted we keep for parts. I opened it, and to my surprise, it powered on immediately. "Sabrina, don't..." His voice floated from the doorway, but it lacked conviction, as if part of him wanted me to find whatever was hidden there. There was no password, no protection, just a desktop with a single folder labeled letters. Inside were dozens of documents, each titled with a single word, unworthy. With trembling fingers, I opened the first one, dated 2 years ago, before we'd even met. "Angela, by the time you read this, I'll already have found a reason to push you away. I always do. You deserve someone who can accept love without questioning its motives, without sabotaging its expressions. That person isn't me. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. Know that it's not about you. It's about the broken parts of me that flinch away from goodness like it's a flame that will consume me." I closed the document, opened another, different name, same confession, then another and another. A catalogue of premeditated heartbreaks, a paper trail of calculated destruction. Declan stood in the doorway, watching me with the resigned expression of someone witnessing an inevitable collision. "You've done this before," I said quietly, "to all of them." He nodded, a small movement that contained galaxies of admission. "Why keep the letters?" "To remind myself of what I am." His voice was barely audible. "So I won't forget the next time I'm tempted to believe I could be different." I closed the laptop gently, as if it contained fragile things. In a way, it did. The fragmented remains of Declan's capacity for intimacy. The archaeological evidence of his systematic self-sabotage. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked. "I was hoping you'd be the one," he said. And the worst part was how sincere he sounded. The one who would make me want to stop running. The one who would make me believe I deserved to stay. "But instead, I became another letter in your collection." He winced. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Declan? Explain it to me." My voice rose, filling our bedroom, the space where we'd whispered dreams and constructed futures, all of them built on quicksand. "I don't know how to be loved without destroying it," he said, and for the first time, I heard the raw edge of anguish in his voice. "It's like being handed something precious and knowing, with absolute certainty, that you'll eventually drop it. So you throw it first just to have control over when it breaks." 3 hours later, I sat alone in Mockingbird Cafe again. The late-night crowd had thinned to a few students hunched over laptops, faces illuminated by blue light. The barista gave me a sympathetic look as she refilled my cup. My eyes must have told the story my lips couldn't form. My phone buzzed with a text from Declan. "Come home, please, I can change." The greatest lie wasn't his infidelity. It was the belief that love could heal what was broken inside him. That I could love him hard enough, pure enough, to overwrite the narrative he'd been telling himself since childhood. I typed back 3 words. "I believe you." Because I did. I believed he could change, but not while using me as both the catalyst and the collateral damage of his transformation. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. "Then why won't you come back?" I stared at the message, feeling an unexpected calm settle over me. The answer was so clear now, sitting among strangers in this cafe where my old life had begun to unravel just hours ago. "Because I can love you without staying." I watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. Finally, I didn't cheat because I stopped loving you. I cheated because I never learned how to love myself. A truth that came too late, a revelation that cost too much. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off my phone and ordered another coffee. The barista, her name tag said Jade, smiled as she handed me the cup. "Rough night?" she asked. "The end of one," I replied. "The beginning of something else." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. Maybe she did. Maybe all of us carry these fault lines beneath our skin, these moments when we choose either to stay in beautiful ruins or to walk away and build something new. When I finally returned to our apartment, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. Declan was sitting on the floor beside our bed, surrounded by scattered papers, his letters, I realized. All of them torn to pieces. He looked up when I entered, his face ravaged by tears. "I'm not asking you to stay," he said hoarsely. "I'm just asking you to believe that I know now what I've been doing, what I've been running from." I set my bag down gently. "I believe you," I said again, "but recognition isn't the same as change. I know." He gathered the torn papers with shaking hands. "I've been in therapy for 6 weeks, since before Emily. I knew what was happening, Sabrina. I could feel myself starting to sabotage us. I just couldn't stop the pattern once it started. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin, understanding. "I'm still leaving," I said softly. He nodded, not looking up from the paper fragments in his hands. "I know, not because I don't love you, and not because I don't believe you can heal." I knelt beside him, careful not to touch him, but because I've realized something important. He looked up then, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "What's that?" "That loving someone doesn't mean disappearing into their darkness. It doesn't mean making yourself small enough to fit into the cracks of their broken places." A single tear slid down his cheek. "I never wanted that for you. I know, but it was happening anyway." I stood up, suddenly certain of what I needed to do. "I'm going to stay with Mia for a while. I'll come back for my things next week." He nodded again, accepting this boundary like a man accepting a sentence he knows is just. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Sabrina?" I paused at the doorway. "Yes?" "Thank you for seeing me," he whispered. "Even the parts I tried to hide. Especially those." I looked back at him one last time. This man I had loved so completely, whose maps and contours I had memorized, whose ghosts I had tried to exorcise with the force of my belief in him. "Learn to see yourself," I told him. "That's the only way forward." 6 months later, I sat in Mockingbird Cafe again, laptop open to a half-finished manuscript. The words were flowing easier now, stories I'd always wanted to tell but somehow couldn't access when I was busy trying to be someone's salvation. Jade, no longer just my barista but now a friend, slid a fresh cappuccino beside my computer. "On the house," she winked, "for my favorite regular." "You're going to go out of business with that attitude," I smiled back. "Worth it to keep the ambience literary." She nodded toward my screen. "How's the novel coming?" "It's healing," I said simply. She squeezed my shoulder before moving on to the next table. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. Found a therapist who specializes in attachment trauma, 6 months sober from relationships. Learning to sit with myself without running. Thank you for being the mirror I couldn't look away from. D. I read it twice, then set my phone down without responding. Not out of anger or bitterness, but because some conversations are meant to end. Some chapters close without neat resolutions. Outside, rain started to fall again. The familiar percussion of Seattle saying hello. But this time, I didn't feel that old heaviness. The rain was just rain. Not metaphor, not melancholy. Just water falling from the sky, nurturing whatever chose to grow beneath it. I took a sip of my cappuccino and returned to my manuscript, my fingers moving across the keyboard with newfound certainty. The story wasn't about Declan anymore. It wasn't even about heartbreak. It was about a woman who learned that the most dangerous love is the one that makes you disappear, and how she found herself again, one ordinary Tuesday morning, in the gentle light of a cafe where strangers became friends, where words became bridges back to herself, where the steam from a coffee cup no longer obscured her reflection, but revealed it clear and true at last.